Summer 1943. Somewhere in the South China Sea, a freighter groaned as though the ocean were trying to pull it apart. In the pitch-dark hold, the sound was a living thing, vibrating through rusted steel and bruised bodies. At first, the men thought it was rats. Then came the tapping, slow, measured, too deliberate for claws. Tap tap tap. Pause. Tap tap. Code, someone whispered. Lieutenant John Jack Miller blinked in the dark, trying to make sense of the noise. His lips were split, his tongue like leather in his mouth, but the word came out hoarse. Morse. Nobody could see his face, but heads turned toward him anyway, a ripple of soundless hope moving through the hold. If it was Morse, it meant another ship. Another set of prisoners. It meant they weren't alone in this floating tomb. And what a tomb it was! The Japanese called it Hakko Maru, just another freighter hauling coal and rice and human cargo. The Americans, if they'd known about it, would have called it a hell ship. It smelled like one, the air thick with human sweat, mildew, and the sweet rot of men too weak to crawl to the corner latrine. The heat made every breath feel like drinking soup through a wet rag. Jack had been here for 13 days. Or maybe 15. The days were impossible to count when the only light came from the small hatch above, opened once or twice to toss down rice balls and, when the gods remembered, a few buckets of water. In the gloom, he made out the silhouette of Sergeant William Red Callahan, a broad-shouldered Marine with hair the color of dried blood. Red had a voice like gravel in a tin can, and even here he hadn't lost his habit of cracking jokes. "Hey, Jack," Red muttered. "You think they'd mind if I asked for a side of steak with this morning's rice ball? Maybe a little Worcestershire sauce?" There were chuckles, hollow but real. Even humor was rationed down here. Jack didn't answer. He was listening to the tapping. The sound stopped. The ocean creaked. Someone coughed, wet and rattling. Red noticed his silence. "What's the news, flyboy? You hear something?" "Could be a convoy," Jack said. "Could be another ship calling for help. Could be nothing." Red grinned in the dark. "Great. Nothing's my favorite." The Hakko Maru was one of dozens of ships pressed into service that summer. Japan's war machine was hungry, and it used anything that could float to haul its cargo, including human lives. Over 140,000 Allied prisoners of war were shipped like this during the war. Thousands never reached their destinations. The men had expected prison camps, barbed wire, watchtowers, maybe even work details. Instead, they got this, a floating cell with no ventilation, no doctor, and barely enough food to keep a man upright. The first week, men tried to keep order. They organized a watch, rationed water, even sang to keep spirits up. By the second week, the watch had dissolved. The singing stopped. Jack spent his time lying against the hull, letting the metal steal what little heat he had left in him. He was 27, but war had aged him to 40. He used to have a crew cut so neat you could set a ruler against it. Now his hair was matted with salt and sweat, his flight suit stiff as canvas. Sometimes, at night, he imagined he could hear the sea whispering through the hull, counting them down one by one. Each wave sounded like a nail hammered into the coffin. It wasn't all cruelty, though. Not entirely. Dr. Harold Sato, a Nisei interpreter conscripted into the Imperial Army, sometimes came below deck with the guards. He wasn't allowed to speak to the prisoners, but he'd linger near the hatch a little longer than necessary, listening. One night, when the guards' backs were turned, he let slip a whisper. "Philippines," he said. It was the first word Jack had heard in English since capture. Red heard it too. "What about the Philippines?" he hissed back. But Sato was already gone. Red muttered something that sounded like a prayer and a curse mashed together. "If they're hauling us to Manila, I hope they put us up somewhere with a view." Someone in the back laughed, a dry, cracked sound that turned into a cough. WWII the 13th day, one man had died. Dysentery, dehydration, heat, it was hard to tell which had claimed him first. The guards dragged his body out and didn't return for hours. When they finally tossed down the rice balls, Red caught one and stared at it. "Seasoned with weevils today," he said. "Extra protein. Lucky us." Jack didn't laugh this time. Up on deck, Lieutenant Commander Masaru Tanaka stood with arms folded, watching the horizon. The air smelled like diesel and salt. Tanaka was no sadist. He didn't enjoy this duty, but he carried it out with the precision of a man who believed his country's survival depended on it. Still, when he thought nobody was watching, his jaw would tighten. He could hear the prisoners coughing through the deck plates at night. "Sir," one of the sailors reported. "Escort ship reports American submarine activity last night." Tanaka's eyes narrowed. If the convoy was attacked, there would be no time to evacuate the prisoners. They would go down with the ship. He glanced at the hatch leading below. His stomach twisted. The first rain came at night, a storm that turned the deck into a slick black river. Water leaked into the hold. The men scrambled to keep it from rising above their ankles, bailing with helmets, with hands, with whatever they had. By morning, they were soaked but alive. And strangely, they were grateful. The rainwater was cleaner than anything they'd had in days. Some men cupped it in their palms and drank until they choked. "Best damn bath I've had all year," Red said, grinning through cracked lips. The tapping returned the next day. Louder this time. Clearer. Jack's pulse quickened. He pressed his ear to the bulkhead and tried to make out the rhythm. "Torpedoes," his brain whispered. "Convoy under attack." Then came the distant boom. Low, muffled, but real. The men froze. Another boom. And another. Someone began to pray. Someone else started laughing. High, thin, almost hysterical. Red's grin returned. "Well, boys," he said softly, "looks like the neighbors are having a party." Jack felt something cold and electric crawl up his spine. If an American sub was out there, it didn't know this ship was full of POWs. The next shell might set them free, or send them straight to the bottom. And as if to answer his thought, the ocean outside went dead quiet. The engines cut. The ship rocked in eerie stillness. Somewhere out there, something was approaching. The silence lasted too long. The Hakko Maru floated like a corpse on black water, engines cut, crew whispering on deck. Below, the prisoners waited, listening for anything, the hum of propellers, the hiss of steam, a shouted order. Jack's ears rang from the sudden stillness. It was worse than the storm. The storm had been loud, alive, human. This quiet felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground to give way. Then came the first distant boom. It was far off, so far it almost could have been thunder. But the next was closer, sharper, a sound that didn't roll but cracked, echoing through the hull like a hammer blow. "Submarine," Jack whispered. The word was a prayer and a curse. Above them, Lieutenant Commander Masaru Tanaka barked orders. The convoy was under attack. Somewhere beyond the dark horizon, an American wolf pack was prowling. Torpedoes had already found one freighter, sending it to the bottom in minutes. "Engines full," the captain shouted. The freighter shuddered as life returned to its screws. Tanaka clenched his jaw. Running might save the cargo, but it would also mean that if this ship was hit, the prisoners below would have no chance of escape. He could picture the hold flooding, the men pounding on the bulkhead as the ocean swallowed them. But orders were orders. Below deck, the sudden roar of the engines turned the hold into an oven. The men stripped their shirts, sweat running in rivers down their backs. The air grew so thick it felt like chewing cloth. Red sat with his back against the bulkhead, head tipped up, smiling despite it all. "Well," he said, "if we don't drown, we'll cook." Jack didn't smile. He pressed his palms into the steel floor to feel the vibration. Every minute, every lurch of the hull meant they were running. Which meant the danger wasn't over, it was just closer. Red had started carving tally marks into the wooden beam near where he slept. One for each day. The marks were uneven, some scratched deep, some barely visible, but they gave shape to the time. "This one's lucky number 15, Red said, dragging his makeshift nail against the wood. 15 days without dying, Jack said. Red grinned. "That's how I'm counting it." The heat brought sickness. Men too weak to stand lay in the corners, their bodies slick with fever sweat. The stench became unbearable. One man, a British sergeant, stopped breathing some time before dawn. There was no ceremony, just a quiet moment, as though the whole hold held its breath. When the guards finally came, they dragged him away without a word. The hatch slammed shut. Red muttered, "They oughta at least say thank you. That's one less rice ball they have to throw down here tomorrow." The joke got a thin, bitter laugh. That night, the convoy zigzagged, trying to outrun death. Each time the ship turned sharply, the prisoners were thrown against each other, their bodies a single, bruised mass. Then came the sound they'd all been waiting for, the unmistakable thud of a torpedo strike. Not this ship. Another. The men could hear the sailors shouting above deck, the metallic clatter of boots as the crews scrambled to stations. Jack closed his eyes. Somewhere out there, another hold full of men just like them had been cracked open like a can and dragged under. The ship ran harder. 2 nights later, the storm came back. A monsoon, sudden and brutal, with rain so hard it stung like shot pellets. Water leaked through the seams of the hatch, pooling fast on the floor. In minutes, it was ankle-deep. The men went to work without orders, bailing with helmets, boots, even their hands. It was a miserable, frantic effort, but it kept them alive. When the rain stopped, they were soaked to the bone, shivering. But the water was fresh, sweet. Jack cupped his hands, drank deep, and for a moment almost wept. "This might be the Navy's way of giving us coffee," Red said with a grin. "Black, no sugar." Even Jack laughed this time. Dawn, they heard it again. Gunfire, sharper this time, closer. Then came the flash. Through the small grate in the hatch, the sky lit red. The horizon itself seemed to be on fire. "Someone's getting hit hard," Red said. The guard above deck shouted something in Japanese, a single word repeated over and over, Hikoki. Airplanes stood on deck. Tanaka watched black shapes emerge from the clouds. American planes. The ship's captain barked for anti-aircraft gunners to open fire. The deck erupted in chaos, tracers streaking skyward. Tanaka hesitated. He knew what would come next, the strafing runs, the bombs, the panic. He glanced toward the hatch leading below, where the prisoners huddled. His hand hovered over the key on his belt. One turn of the wrist could free them. But if he was seen, he would be court-martialed, executed. He closed his fist around the key. Not yet. The first plane screamed overhead, guns spitting fire. Bullets tore through the deck, splintering wood, punching holes in the superstructure. The freighter shuddered. The prisoners below held their breath, listening to the storm of lead. "Sounds like 4th of July, Red said softly, his voice trembling despite himself. Then came the whistle, a sound Jack would never forget, followed by the roar of impact as something exploded off the port side. The whole ship lurched. Men tumbled across the floor. Somewhere in the darkness, someone screamed. When the echo died, the only sound was water rushing in somewhere above. The attack stopped as suddenly as it began. The ship limped forward, engines screaming. In the hold, Jack gripped the beam overhead, knuckles white. His heart thudded so hard it hurt. "Maybe that was it," someone said in the dark. "Maybe they're gone." But Jack didn't believe it. He could feel it in the steel under his hands, the tension, the fear, the sense that the next blow would come harder. Somewhere out there, the sea was holding its breath, waiting. The klaxon wailed on deck, the alarm for another air attack. Boots thundered above. The ship heeled sharply to starboard, throwing the prisoners against the wall. Then came the drone of engines, louder this time, closer. Jack raised his head toward the sound, heart hammering. If the next bomb found its mark, they would never make it out of this floating coffin. And then, just as the sky above seemed to crack open, the world turned white with fire. The world turned white. For a moment, there was no sound, just a blinding flash, as if the ocean itself had been split open. Then came the roar, a thunder that rattled the steel and seemed to crush the air out of their lungs. Jack found himself face down on the floor, ears ringing, mouth full of dust and blood. He didn't remember falling. Around him, men groaned, cursed, prayed. Above them, the ship screamed, metal tearing, timbers snapping. Somewhere nearby, fire raged. The hold was suddenly thick with smoke, creeping in through cracks in the hatch. "This is it," someone coughed. Red Callahan rolled to his knees, wiping blood from his forehead. "Not yet, it ain't." Above, the Hako Maru was a nightmare. Anti-aircraft guns spat fire into the sky, tracers arcing upward like fiery beads on a string. Japanese sailors shouted orders, their voices almost drowned by the howl of engines as American planes dove low, their guns stitching lines of bullets across the deck. Lieutenant Commander Masao Tanaka stood by the hatch, gripping the key so tightly it bit into his palm. He saw the first mate cut down by strafing fire, his body flipping backward like a rag doll. Smoke curled around them, and the captain was screaming for the crew to man the pumps. Tanaka made his decision. He turned the key. The prisoners heard the bolt grind, then the hatch swung open, flooding the hold with blinding light and choking smoke. "Out!" Tanaka barked, his Japanese accent sharp, clipped. For a split second, no one moved. They had dreamed of this moment, but the open hatch felt like a trick, a cruel joke. Then Red was on his feet. "Move, damn you!" he shouted, hauling the weakest men toward the ladder. Jack followed, every muscle screaming as he climbed into the burning air. The deck was chaos. Smoke hung low, guns blazed, sailors ran in every direction. Jack's boots slipped on blood and seawater. The smell of oil and cordite made him gag. He pulled himself up, blinking against the glare, just in time to see an American plane bank low over the ship, its guns flashing. Bullets stitched across the deck. A Japanese gun crew crumpled. Red grabbed Jack by the shoulder and dragged him toward the stern, where Tanaka was waving them. "This way!" Tanaka shouted. The Japanese captain saw the prisoners on deck and roared with rage. He pointed his pistol at Tanaka, shouting orders. Tanaka did not flinch. "They will drown if we leave them below," he shouted back. The captain raised his pistol, and was cut down by a burst of American machine gun fire. It was as if the war itself had made the decision. From the stern, Jack caught a glimpse of the horizon, a dark silhouette against the dawn light. An American destroyer. For a moment, he thought he might be hallucinating, but then he saw the flash of its guns. "Holy hell," Red whispered. "That's ours." But between them and salvation was a wall of fire and water. A second bomb struck forward of the mast. The Hako Maru shuddered violently, the deck pitching under their feet. "Abandon ship!" someone screamed in Japanese. Sailors began leaping overboard. The ship was listing hard to port now, water pouring through the ruptured hull. Tanaka grabbed Jack's arm. "You go now," he shouted. Jack hesitated. "Come with us." Tanaka shook his head. "I stay. My duty." But he pressed something into Jack's hand, the key to the hatch. "Keep it," he said. "Proof." Then he turned and ran toward the bridge. The prisoners didn't wait any longer. They climbed the rail and leapt. Jack hit the water hard, the shock of it knocking the air out of him. Oil slick coated the surface, burning his eyes. When he came up gasping, the freighter loomed behind him, black smoke pouring from its guts. Red surfaced nearby, coughing. "Swim, fly boy. She's going under." Jack kicked hard, arms aching, dragging himself clear of the suction. Behind him, the Hako Maru gave a final, shuddering groan and began to slip beneath the waves. It went down slow, like a beast dying. Men clung to wreckage, screaming. The sea boiled with debris, oil, and bodies. For minutes that felt like hours, they floated, clinging to whatever they could find, a plank, a barrel, a piece of rope. Jack felt strangely calm. The sun was just rising, turning the smoke pink and gold. Around him, men coughed, prayed, or went silent. Red bobbed nearby, grinning through cracked lips. "I told you," he said. "We weren't gonna die in that hold." Jack almost laughed, but then something brushed his leg. He looked down and saw the fin. The first scream came from somewhere to the left. Then the water churned red. "Sharks!" someone shouted. Panic surged. Men kicked, thrashed, tried to climb onto bits of wreckage. Jack gritted his teeth and kept kicking. If he let fear take over, he was done. Then he heard the sound, a deep thrum that cut through the chaos. Engines. The American destroyer was closing fast, its bow cutting the waves. Jack could see sailors lining the rail, pointing. Ropes! Someone shouted. Lines snaked down from the deck. Hands reached into the water, hauling the survivors up one by one. When Jack's turn came, he gripped the rope so hard his palms burned. The sailors pulled him up, over the rail, onto solid deck. He lay there, coughing seawater, feeling the vibration of the engines through the steel. He had not felt solid ground in weeks. Red flopped down beside him, grinning. "Well," he said, "I always wanted to see the Navy up close." Not all of them made it. Of the hundreds crammed into the hold, barely half were pulled from the sea. Jack sat up slowly, watching the horizon. The freighter was gone now, just a slick of oil and smoke marking where it had been. Somewhere out there, Tanaka had gone down with his ship. Jack opened his hand and stared at the key. The destroyer's captain came down to the deck, scanning the survivors. "You boys are lucky," he said grimly. "We almost sank you ourselves." Jack nodded slowly, fingers closing around the key. "Lucky." But as he looked at the men around him, shivering, coughing, some staring blankly into the distance, he wondered what they were now. Survivors, yes, but also witnesses. And the sea, though it had tried to claim them, had spit them back out. What came next, Jack knew, would matter even more than living through this morning. The sea had gone strangely quiet after the last blast. Only the faint hiss of steam and the groan of ruptured metal carried over the waves. Smoke drifted low and oily, turning the dawn into a watercolor of grays and burnt orange. For a moment, it felt like the war itself had paused. Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the deck of the USS Paddle with his binoculars pressed to his face. The submarine was still, its engines idling like a waiting beast. Out there, just off starboard, floated the remains of the Japanese hell ship Rokyo Maru. Its broken spine jutted up like the ribs of some drowned leviathan. Through the lenses, Hayes saw movement, thin arms waving, heads barely above the water, men clinging to planks and cargo nets. At first, they were just shapes, gray and skeletal, but then one of them raised a weak hand and Hayes saw it, the faded outline of an American flag on a tattered sleeve. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "They're ours." It hit him all at once. Those weren't enemy survivors. Those were Allied prisoners. Hundreds of them. He slammed down the binoculars and barked to his crew, "Launch the whaleboats. Get every man who can hold an oar." Below decks, the submariners scrambled like a nest of kicked ants. Within minutes, the small boats were sliding into the water. The sea, still slick with oil, carried the smell of cordite and burning flesh, but the men rowed hard, pulling toward the cries. For the prisoners, it felt like the end had already come. Private Eddie Callahan coughed seawater and oil until his throat burned. His ribs stuck out like slats on a broken barrel, and every breath felt like sucking air through a wet rag. He held onto the spar with one numb hand and the last thread of hope with the other. All around him, men floated, silent or moaning. A few had already gone still, faces down. He heard Sergeant Tom Alvarez's voice, hoarse but sharp. "Heads up, boys, boats coming." Eddie blinked through stinging salt and saw them. American sailors, sleeves rolled, faces grim, rowing hard. He laughed, a ragged, disbelieving sound. "We made it," he whispered, though no one heard. The first whaleboat reached them, and strong hands pulled men aboard, one by one. They were ghosts, skin and bones, hair matted with salt, some too weak to speak. "Easy, we've got you," a sailor said as he lifted Callahan in. Eddie tried to salute, but his arm flopped uselessly. "Thought you boys were a dream," he croaked. "Nah," the sailor grinned, though his eyes glistened. "We're real enough. Welcome back to the land of the living." The boat rocked as more survivors were hauled in. Some kissed the gunwales, some wept openly, some just stared as if afraid it would all vanish if they blinked. By noon, the Paddle's deck was lined with survivors. Hayes walked among them, giving orders for food, blankets, and first aid. One man pressed his forehead to the steel deck and murmured thanks over and over, as if it were holy ground. Doc Ramsey, the submarine's medic, looked up from bandaging a man's leg. "Captain, you know what this means?" Hayes nodded grimly. "The Japanese were transporting POWs on those ships, and we've been sinking them for months." It landed heavy on both men. War was full of impossible choices, but this one would haunt them. Still, Hayes knew they had no choice but to save every last soul who still floated out there. "Keep searching," he said. "If there's one man left alive, we're bringing him in." That night, the sea seemed to breathe easier, as if the water itself had released something it had been holding too long. On deck, Alvarez sat wrapped in a blanket, looking at the stars. Eddie dropped beside him, a tin mug of thin coffee in his shaking hands. "Never thought I'd see the Big Dipper again," Alvarez said softly. Eddie nodded. "Funny, ain't it? All those months in the hold, smelling death every day, I kept thinking about the sky. Just one clean look at it. Thought maybe God forgot us." Alvarez glanced at him, a crooked smile forming. Maybe he just sent a submarine instead. They both laughed, quiet but real. In the early hours before dawn, Hayes stood at the conning tower, looking back at the wreckage now far behind. The horizon was clean again. He thought of the Japanese guards who had gone down with the ship, the prisoners who hadn't made it, the bitter truth that American torpedoes had killed their own countrymen before. War wasn't neat. It never would be. But tonight, at least, the sea had given something back. He whispered to the waves, almost like a prayer, "Let them get home." When the paddle finally made port, word spread like wildfire. Reporters swarmed, and the rescued men told their stories, of suffocating holds, beatings, starvation, and then the moment they saw the stars over the wreck and thought they had died. Callahan would later write in his diary, "When that boat came for us, I felt the war shift. Not just for me, for all of us. It was like the sea had been holding us hostage, and the Navy came and paid the ransom. We were free men again, not just bodies in the dark." Years later, at reunions, those survivors would joke about the coffee on the paddle being strong enough to raise the dead. But when the jokes were done and the room grew quiet, they would all fall silent at the same moment, the one when they remembered the boat sliding toward them over the oil-slick sea. The memory was sharp enough to taste, salty enough to sting, and every one of them, in his own way, would whisper thanks to the sea that set them free.